It's Sunday, March 3rd, 2024 at around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and you're joining me for the fourth developer diary, game design diary for High and Low. This is not the best place to start. If you haven't seen the first three, this will probably be the least coherent of the set. Maybe start with number 3. But if you're interested in more of the nitty-gritty discussion of game mechanics, and maybe you could say the theory behind the game, this might be the video for you. Okay, let me check in with the chat. Martinez Conradi, the author of some of my favorite Sherlock Holmes consulting detective fan cases, is here. Debbie Levy, who's been helping with the editing. Isara, who just tested the first case. Roberto, who's been helping with stuff as well. Doris Lewis. YouTube says 9 concurrent viewers, so a small group today, but that's fine. Okay, quick bookkeeping before we jump into this. Yesterday we played a fan case for Mythos Tales called There and Back Again, which was quite good. I have a new appreciation for how hard it is to write these cases. And I'll be talking a little bit about Mythos Tales today. So let me talk about what I have planned here. I've titled this session Time and Tension, which is a nice catchy title, I think. I'm not going to quite be able to deliver on that, but so what I want to talk about today is a sort of controversial topic for people who like this genre of Sherlock Holmes consulting detective. And that is, how do you deal with time? Is it a limited resource, or is the world essentially static? And what's the relationship between that and creating some tension and tough decisions in the game? And so let me set up the sort of question we're going to be looking at here, or an outline of today's session. Now, in previous sessions, I've basically had an hour's worth of slides to go through, and then taken a couple questions and discussions along the way. That's kind of how I like to do things. I don't like to be reliant on a discussion. But this one, even more than the previous talks, I'm willing to skip over stuff or stop stuff and just discuss stuff if people in the channel want to talk more. Previous design diaries, I've been showing contents of High and Low, which you can see the box behind me there, that purple box. I'm not really going to show off anything or talk about any of the latest developments in on High and Low. The only thing I will say up front is that my first case is ready to play. If you want to play test it, you can come by the Discord for this channel. There's a link in the About page. And on the Discord, there's some very active discussion about all the topics I'm talking about today and many more. So if you're interested in helping with the design of High and Low and talking about some of these issues more, I hope you'll stop by the Discord. I am about to start on a big new piece of the project, the online support for it, and I could use some more coders if anyone is a programmer and interested in helping. Okay, let's get back to our time and tension talk. All right, so here's an overview of what we're going to be looking at. The main question today is, how do Sherlock Holmes consulting detective-like games, which High and Low is one of, handle the passage of time, and more importantly, why? What are the costs and benefits to each of these decisions? How do they affect the way the game is experienced? And how do they affect the decision-making and incentive structure of the game? And then I think the last-minute thing that I added here, which I think is maybe the most important part, is a claim I'm going to make here. And my claim is that most of the games that incorporate time create high tension, which is good, at the cost of high risks to the game experience. And my proposal is, for high and low, to create high tension with an actual low risk, but the illusion of high risk. And that's a pitch I'm going to make, a claim that I'm going to hope to convince you. And I'm not going to convince you in a talk, but I think part of what high and low is as an experiment is to test this hypothesis that actually you don't need to make a game with a high risk of breaking, a high risk of failure, a high fragility to create that same experience of high tension. As game players, we have a sort of automatic scaling of risk. If you put someone in a game and you say, this is a game about World War II, the players in their mind create a very high-risk scenario. If we don't do this wrong, our countries get wiped off the earth. But then if you say, here's a game where you're trying to paint a picture, and you're trying to collect tiles to paint your picture, right, or do your stained glass, the player scales that risk. And as a couple minutes into the game, that becomes an important goal that's treated with some weight. And because of that feature, we tend to auto-scale things. I think you don't have to have an actual high risk of the game breaking and ending in catastrophe to capture most of the benefits of that feeling of risk while you're playing. And I think we can get to that, but that's going to be at the end. We'll spend most of my slides, at least, I'll try to go through them quickly, going through some of these Sherlock Holmes consulting detective games and talking about how they handle time and tension differently. So here's my list of Sherlock Holmes consulting detective-like games. I've left a couple off the list that are identical. Each of these has a slightly different take on the issue, though. Debbie says, why is this automatic assumption that high risk is good? It seems to have come out of nowhere the past couple of months. Well, okay, let's have a little diversion to talk about this for a second. High risk is not the best term. But when we play Sherlock Holmes style games, one of the issues that I think is an issue with this game, and it's not going to be an issue for everyone, but the question is, if there's no time limit, if it doesn't matter what order you go to leads, when you find a couple leads you can go to, if you're going to go everywhere and have unlimited time, then you've removed from the experience the central part of board games, which is decisions. You've removed decisions from the equation. And it turns into a puzzle, which is not bad. The puzzle is figuring out the different places to go and assembling your solution to the mystery. But you've excised a key element to what makes a game fun, which is decisions. So when I say high risk or the feeling of high risk, what I mean is meaningful decisions. So I do want high and low to have meaningful decisions. So that's another way to phrase it. Okay, but let's start there with a game that has no decisions, essentially, which is the classic Sherlock Holmes consulting detective from 1981. There is no time. Time does not pass. They're classically one-day cases. You go everywhere you want. It's a static world. There's no thematic feeling of time passes. It's part of the charm of the game, is that everything is written in a way that it doesn't matter what order you go to places. I suppose you could say there is one decision. That's when to end the case. And there's, in fact, a scoring system that incentivizes you to end the case as quickly as possible to get the maximum score. Now, many people who play Sherlock Holmes Detective completely ignore this scoring mechanism based on how fast you can do it. And others of us not only ignore it, but have pointed to this as a flaw in the game. It's a very discordant situation where you're rewarding the player for skipping reading most of the clues to the case. And it feels like the opposite of what you want. You would rather the person be thorough and see everything. But it creates weird situations. It also creates situations that we saw a little bit with our playthrough yesterday when there's no time limit. When it gets to the end, the cases tend to drag because depending on what kind of person you are, you're like, well, when I turn to the end to read the questions, I'm not going to have a chance to go back, so I better really make sure I've seen everything. And so you spend a lot of time churning at the end after you've already solved the case. And so part of the problem with this kind of thing is the pacing gets messed up. It feels like there's no arc to the game, there's no pacing, and by the time you get to the end, you've almost, by definition, either jumped to the end before you should have and missed some stuff because you're trying to end it quickly and get a better score, or you've dragged yourself at the end and really spent a lot of time churning through, not sure whether you're at the end. Okay. Rob says, I need a citation for the claim that many Sherlock Holmes consulting detective people ignore the time for scoring. Well, I don't have polls to tell you how many, but my experience playing through games on the channel, many of us don't pay attention to the scoring because of this. Okay. Let's move on, though. Some of the big expansions for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, well, at least Queen's Park, not quite Adventures by Gaslight, have been designed as multi-day cases, and Queen's Park did introduce quite a strict time system. So in Queen's Park, you're given this little timesheet. It's the same timesheet that's used in Gumshoe. It starts early in the morning and goes to late at night, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. or so. Each lead takes a certain amount of time. Traveling takes a certain amount of time. There's a fixed time length to each day. In Queen's Park, there's occasional time-dependent leads. If you get there at night, it's closed, or on a certain day, certain thing happens. It's broken up into days, with a little bit of events that happen between days. If you play this according to the strict time rules, you're going to miss big chunks of the game. The game is designed in such a way, and it's not super carefully tuned. In fact, that's going to be a theme in most of the games that we've played. They're so hard to playtest and so hard to control where a player goes that it's very hard to control the experience the player has. And in all of these games, Queen's Park is the first one we're looking at here, if you follow the time rules, there's big chunks of the mystery you're not going to see, and you may get lucky and see all the important ones, or unlucky and miss big, key, important rules. And Queen's Park, we started getting rid of some of these time rules right as we played it. The traveling is a very interesting rule. It makes complete intuitive sense that you want to make an optimization puzzle out of traveling. So you make a cost to traveling. A couple other of these games use that. And we quickly got rid of that. Not only is it a bit fiddly to track, but it also started making us do very inefficient actions. In other words, we were saying, well, we're in this neighborhood, let's do some stuff in here before we go do the thing we really want to do because of efficiency. And this is going to be something I think we should circle back to, but it's something where thematically it makes sense that time costs you to travel, but it goes against the enjoyment of the game. All right, let's just walk through some of these. Well, maybe I should start paying some attention to the channel since I said I was going to. Debbie says, I ignore the time for one. She's answering Rob. The motivation to not read everything is to try to solve the mystery. Otherwise, there's no point playing the game. I mean, I agree with that. I tend to be a completionist. I want to see everything. So I'm not going to play with any rules that don't let me see everything. We'll get to that. Okay, next up, Gumshoe. Gumshoe and Queen's Park have a lot in common. Gumshoe sort of was doubling down on everything, though. Gumshoe is divided into days where significant events start to happen between days. Gumshoe is the closest model for high and low. Again, travel times between certain areas. In Gumshoe, there are a lot of leads that depend on the day and the time, and much more so even than Queen's Park, huge numbers of areas that you will not be able to see if you play by the time limit rules. Huge parts of cases. Gumshoe has a 10 days with lots of interleaved cases. And the rules talk about this dilemma that you'll have to play through the entire game multiple times to make sense out of everything. Queen's Park says the same basic thing, but Gumshoe even much more. And because it's such a long experience, you really have a tricky decision to make about how to replay it. And when I did it, I had my own set of rules where I played each day multiple times before proceeding to the next day. It's a very awkward thing. And it's somewhat an odd situation because the time passing rules are so realistic. But the way you have to play the game to experience the whole thing are completely artificial, like replaying a day multiple times, repeating actions, and making different branching choices. So, but the benefit here is it feels like you're in a living, breathing world here. Martinez is saying we've got to balance mechanics, theme, and narrative satisfaction. I completely agree with that. Rob says, if your main goal is to solve it, seems like a motivator to do read everything at no cost to the score since you ignore the score. That's fine. Debbie says, the fun part is trying to work out which ones will help. You miss that if you just read through everything. I don't know if I quite agree with that. It's very hard in these cases to predict. It's thematic and reasonable to rank leads according to what you think is going to have useful information. But it's very risky to say we're not going to read this lead because it's lower down on where we think is going to give us information. And that feels like a mistake and could easily lead to a bad experience. If you don't go someplace because you think it might not be useful, but then it has a key element to the case. It's impossible to as an author to have surprise and also do that and have it where the players can 100% be sure where they shouldn't go because it's useless. But we'll get back to a little bit of that. Ellery Queen was this little knockoff of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. It's mostly timeless, but there are occasional time limits to the turns. So Gumshoe and Queen's Park kept track of what time of day it is. Ellery Queen just says keep track of what turn it is. But one thing that Ellery Queen has that the others don't have is events that trigger at certain turns. Like at turn 7, go read this, and some event happens or some area locks off to you. And it's an interesting way to create a more dynamic world. Next up is Mugbook, a little odd one in this set. Feels different, works different, has 4 periods per day, basically 4 6-hour blocks per day, is arranged in multiple days, has a sort of soft timeline on some cases where it says you have to solve the case by day 5, but you can try to solve it early. And a little bit like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective rewards you for solving it early in most cases. Solving it correctly and early, that's basically the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective approach. And then a little bit of events, typically not events that happen on certain days, but maybe evidence that unlocks on a certain day, which I think is a clever idea and one that we've embraced in High and Low. mostly feels like a static world, but there can be a little bit of dependent on time. That dog's gonna drive me crazy. Okay, Mythos Tales, the game we played last night. Mythos Tales is part of, I would put Mythos Tales and Bureau of Investigation, which I think is next on my list, as the games that have most embraced the idea of having a super strict time limit. Maybe Gumshoe as well. So Mythos Tales is broken into days, a morning, afternoon, and night for each day. But there's tends to be a very strict limit to the number of turns you have for each case, such that you will maybe see half the case when you play through a given case. And occasionally you'll find a location that's gated based on the time of day. Not too much, but so mostly it feels like a static world. There aren't really scheduled events. There are multiple days, but things don't really happen. They don't schedule to happen on different days. There's no special thing you read at the beginning of every day, the way there is with Gumshoe. Instead, it's just the passage of time. Rob says, no leads in Mugbook are dependent on day and time. Is that true that none of them are? Only the scoring checks for how soon you did it. Okay. I guess that's true. I thought maybe occasionally it would be. All right, so that's Mythos Tales. Now, the benefit to that, when we play Mythos Tales, which is got this added element of sort of danger while you're playing it, is it really does feel like the stakes are high with Mythos Tales. You have such limited amount of time. You know don't have time to see everything on most of the cases. And it does make, if you watch our playthroughs, we sit there and chew over what's the best place to go to make the best use of our time in a way that we don't when we play a standard Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective game. In standard Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, we might say, here's a list of 5 people, let's just go to them. We'll go through them in order. There's no real worry. Here, this creates a very enjoyable tension in the decisions of where to go. Doesn't often work. It doesn't often pay off, but it still is enjoyable. I mean, it's not often beneficial to carefully plan out and cull the things that we think are going to be less likely or rank them. It's enjoyable to do. It doesn't often have a real tangible benefit, but it works to create this additional feeling of tension and danger and risk. Razorhurst, and I've mentioned that John Keane has just released a part 2 to Razorhurst, and even more ambitious, is a real oddball here, and sort of shocking in how well it works. If you want to look at one alternate universe way to handle some of these problems in a way different from the way High and Low handles it, that actually worked, and I don't know how John Keane managed to pull it off, it's Razorhurst. You can see Razorhurst has a strict schedule here, a whole week of days. Each day is broken into little time slots. Each turn takes up one time slot, so it's very strictly scheduled. But Razorhurst has some very interesting gamey mechanics. It's the closest to a board game of any of these games, and there's sort of some resource management and some skill testing. And it's got this additional element where you can decide at what time to end your day, and then you start the next day early or late to replenish your resources. It's very clever. It worked quite well, at least on our playthrough, although we've heard that from some people they've had less successful experiences. It's very clever. There's lots of Razorhurst inspiration in High and Low. You can see at the top there. Can I zoom in on that? No. There are actually events that happen at night and during the day for each day. Razorhurst, like Queen's Park, has one little solution to the fragility of players running out of time. And that is, there's sort of an extra day or two at the end that give you time to sort of go to any places you missed by being on this tight time clock in the beginning of the case. So essentially, Queen's Park has a kind of bonus day, and Razorhurst has a bonus couple of days. So basically what's happening, and this is very clever, for the first few days of the case, there are events triggering that really propel the game forward and make it feel like you've got this tight schedule with events and limited time to do stuff. And then as you get to the end, the game is like, well, because of things, the way things are structured, you may not have had time to follow up on all these things. You've been propelled along. So there's a day or two at the end where it's kind of like, well, there's nothing you need to do. So now you got a full day to sort of tie up your loose ends. It works quite well. It's a clever idea. It matches the idea that I favor, that you're sort of creating the illusion of a tight time schedule in the beginning that's making the player really chew on their decisions. And then at the end, you sort of loosen that up and let them backfill anything that they weren't able to do. George Anderson says, I'm not sure you need time limits to make you think carefully on where to go. I'm also a completionist, but I think it's fun to try to solve the game in as few leads as possible. In the end, though, read everything to get the whole story. I think I agree with that. And one of the games we've talked about that has embraced a different approach to this is the game Suspects, the card-driven game. It is there off far to the edge there. And Suspects tried something similar. Suspects said, in the end, you're going to see everything, but we're going to force you to answer the questions at the midway point and so on. That will reward you for being efficient in gathering information and being able to answer questions early. But then at the end, you're going to get to see everything. And you'll see High and Low has adopted some of that idea. But I agree, that's an alternative way to reward players who are efficient. Okay, I think Bureau of Investigation is the last one I have here. A Bureau of Investigation is an oddball hybrid of a bunch of stuff, but one of the things in the Sherlock Holmes consulting detective style cases inside it is a very strict time limit. Again, much like Mythos Tales, it creates some tension and some tough, agonizing decisions by putting the player in a very high-risk situation. That is, it feels high risk. The decisions feel important and tense because it is. Because you're very likely to get through the case and have only seen a small part of what you need to solve the case and not have any chance of solving it. Bureau of Investigation tries to fix that by saying you can play through a case multiple times till you figure it out. I don't think that really works in practice, but it's a clever idea. There's a clever little mechanic at the end to try to make that work, where you don't read the solutions necessarily, you kind of make a decision. Although I do think in Bureau of Investigation, there's no real time passing. It's just a number of leads. But again, it's a fragile system because it's very easy for the player to miss important leads and never get to read them unless they replay the case multiple times, which I think in practice is not feasible. Okay, so that's my roundup of the Sherlock Holmes consulting detective style games. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some problems and issues, and then talk a little bit about High and Low. But are there any I've missed here? I mean, I haven't talked about different kinds of detective games that try to do things a little differently, like Chronicles of Crime, which is more of a video game. So they're able to get around some of these problems by having a behind-the-scenes app that knows where you are and what you've done. There's also Detective Modern Crime that has a slightly different take. It's more of a resource management element to it. Have I missed any Sherlock Holmes consulting detective style games that have a time element? The one series that is left off here is the Postmortem LA, but there's no real time element there. That's much more like classic Sherlock Holmes consulting detective. Let me check in with the chat here. In the games without time limits, sometimes we just try to role play it. We say, well, we're at the scene of the crime, let's talk to the people who are there. Or we're in this neighborhood, there's a place we want to go to. Thematically, role playing, it would feel like we should follow up while we're there. So that's sort of a not a gamey reason or optimization reason for doing anything, but just sort of role playing it, which I think is reasonable, but not ideal. All right, so now let's get into part 2 of this presentation here. Okay, let's look at some of the pros to creating a time element here. First of all, it does make the game feel like a more living, breathing, dynamic world. It is fun to have events trigger and feel like time is passing. If we go here, we might miss something. A little suspense. If you're told something like you can meet with this guy at 4 p.m. tomorrow, you start looking forward to it, imagining what's going to happen when we meet with them. What should we ask them about? There's lots of suspense that I think is one of the more sophisticated elements of some of these games, is not trying to make everything a surprise, but having a little bit of suspense building towards something, and having a passage of time lets you do that. Another big part of these games that are scheduled, that have a time limit on multiple days and times, is it can create a paced experience. Even in games that are like the cold case games, frequently the best ones are divided into acts. And it's fun to sort of wrap up something and then unlock something new and have this new phase 2 begin where different things happen. It's having like multiple games in one. It feels like there's a unfolding campaign. So anything that can break the game up and control its pacing through some arc, I think has some real advantages. And then this comes back to my original claim that the risk of missing key items in these games, like Mythos Tales and Bureau of Investigation, creates a fun experience. Tension, tough decision. That's the real risk of really missing out on key parts of the mystery. Enhances the experience, at least for me. Now, what are the problems here, though? The main problem that I keep hammering with all of these games is the fragility. And what I mean by that is how easy it is for a game group to have a bad experience through no fault of their own because they've missed key elements of the case. It's a real risk of missing out on really important leads. Creates this heightened experience, but the risk is that many groups are going to have a bad time because they're not going to be able to solve the case because they haven't seen everything. And occasionally, for some of the designers, like for Bureau of Investigation, that seems to be an embraced concept. Okay, every group's going to have a different experience. Some are going to completely whiff and just see stuff that's not going to help them solve the case at all, and that's just the way it goes, and that's kind of fun. To me, that's not what I'm going for. I'm interested in a much more controlled experience. And these are part and parcel of the same experience. This is this idea of saying, well, the author is not going to have control over this experience. It's kind of going to be kind of like an open world. You're going to have a strict time clock, and different groups are going to go through have very different experiences in the world. Some are going to see all the important leads. Some, through no fault of their own, are going to go off on different branches and not see anything important. Some authors seem to think that's okay. I'm much more in the camp of trying to curate a much more controlled narrative experience. I want the author to be able to design a narrative, an arc that is more like a book, a satisfying full arc with a little bit more control of what the player actually sees. Now, you still need to have lots of decisions for the player and some illusion of being in an open world. But much like a video game, you want the experience of being in an open world, but you want to try to curate a good experience for the player. And related to this, in fact, more subtly related, but very important, is that when you build a world like this, where different players can see vastly different subsets of information, even when you can orchestrate it so that the game doesn't break if players go off and do different things, you absolutely lose control over the difficulty level. Different people see different subsets of clues. Now the questions at the end are either going to be super hard for one group that's seen certain things or super easy for another group that's seen certain clues. And something that we've talked about before is that it's very hard to make a very difficult case that's got a time limit, because you might have some subtle clue that you want the best of players to find, but then you can't make the case dependent on that clue because most people will never find it and see it. And so it would be unfair. And that creates a very weird situation where you might have a clue that completely gives away the answer, so that people who do find it, it's an easy case, and people who don't find it, it's an impossible case. That's not what you want. It makes balancing the difficulty level very difficult. Let's see. Macon Larry says, surely the risk of missing things and the desire to create a game where you see all leads are entirely contradictory. Both approaches could be fun, but you have to be one or the other, don't you? I think that's basic. Well, it is true by definition that if you have the real risk of missing key important things, then you can't create a game where everyone sees everything. That's right. You can't have the real risk of missing important things, but you can get the benefits of having players worry about missing things. At least that's what I'm going to try to convince you. Let's see if we can get to it. And then a little side issue is the fiddliness of actually tracking time is a cost to players, and you have to be wary of that cost. Okay. Sean says, I tend to agree as well. In playing Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the tension is felt in the moments where you don't know if you're equipped to answer all of the questions. Well, this is a fair point. I mean, I've talked about this, that maybe the one decision in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective classic games is when you decide that you've read enough to go to the end. But that kind of decision is problematic because it forces players to spend huge amounts of time at the end of the game churning through, reducing their score to 0 if they care about score, just in the fear that when they get to the questions, they will have missed something. And I think that's a flaw that can be solved. Okay. So, and Martinez says, as Jesse mentioned before, authors fear that players won't have seen it all and have a bad game. Yes, then authors will build in redundant clues, which then can make a game too easy. So we're going to get to all of this. Yes, absolutely. Those are absolutely true. Okay, so let's talk about the current state of high and low and how high and low handles time and tension. These are all in flux, but here's some basic ideas, trying to thread the needle here. And here's my basic proposal. I guess part one of the proposal is to try to create the tension of tough decisions with low actual risk to missing stuff at the end, but the illusion, the experience of high risk, high stakes decisions. So this gets back to the question of you can't have a game where players can miss key parts. You can't have the tension of that and let them see everything. But I think that's a little bit different. And I think at least Suspects gets at one way you can attack that. So think about how Suspects does it. Suspects says, in the end, you're going to see everything. But we're going to force you to make a decision halfway through. So when you get to that, so all the time you're playing for the first half, you're very carefully trying to optimize your decisions because you want to get the best info. You want to make the best decisions to gather information the most efficiently so you can have the best chance of solving the case early. But in the end, you get to see everything. That's not quite what High and Low does, but it's the same. It's going after the same vibe, which is make the player agonize over their decisions, make the decisions feel tough and weighty and important, but ensure that by the end, that's the key phrase here, by the end, they've seen all of the important things, all of the critical, they've experienced all the critical elements, so that when all the different player groups go through this with the different paths, that they're all going to end up in a fairly tight circle of stuff that they've experienced, that you now have much tighter control as an author over the difficulty level, over their narrative experience, and over the kinds of questions you can ask, because you know that they've all your player groups have taken different paths, but by the end, they've seen a very similar, not identical, but they've seen the critical pieces of the puzzle that you need them to see in order to present them with a very challenging set of questions at the end. And some of that is done through an illusion. So, again, the goal is to create a dynamic world with tough decisions, but let the author maintain a tighter narrative control over the experience. So the question is, how do we do that? Okay, and then I'm going to take a couple steps here before I get into the key ideas to do that. But to remind you how High and Low is structured to maximize sort of this pacing experience and narrative experience. Multiple days with major events between days. The days are sort of like episodic things. So the case really is supposed to unfold over multiple days and feel like things are really developing. One of the ways that we're getting at having interesting decisions is to put actual interesting decisions in the game. This is sort of an orthogonal point. But frequently in these games, we see decisions that don't feel like they're like, do you want to open door A or door B? And there's no basis on making that decision and it doesn't really matter and you don't really care. High and Low tries to encourage authors to put back in very interesting moral decisions and psychological decisions. And one of the cases I've tried to make for these games is that these are narrative games. The people who play these games play it for the enjoyment of narrative. And narrative can be the reward. And if you play the case that I've written for High and Low, there are a bunch of choices that just have narrative consequences. But if players are engaged with the characters in the world, those decisions are going to feel weighty and important. What we've settled on for High and Low currently is a hybrid clock. This is an odd idea, although it turns out it's actually the way we played Queen's Park. It's sort of the way we house ruled Queen's Park. And it's going to take me a moment to explain the justification. It's somewhat artificial. It's not 100% realistic, but it's sort of a trade-off. So the idea in High and Low is, let me just look at the instructions I have for my sample case. So here's the sample case, the introduction, the very first thing you'd read on High and Low. And well, I don't want to show you this yet, I guess. Okay, so you start I'll show you that in a second. You start your day at a certain time, and as you read leads in the book, it'll tell you how time advances. And you've got a case log here, and here's where you're tracking each lead you visit. So similar to Gumshoe, one of the ways we're going to try to make it not so fiddly and easier is to provide these forms for help people track. So you write down the time of day you visited each lead, and each lead will tell you. So typically a half hour, so you start at 9, your next lead will be 9:30. Each lead will tell you. Might be a lead that's not consequential, will only take a couple of minutes. A super long one will take a couple hours. So the first thing is we've got a time of day in the game that's moving along, and events can be scheduled and things can be dependent on the time of day, etc. Just like something like Gumshoe or Razorhurst or Queen's Park. However, there's one exception, which is that when you get to the end of a day, let me see, how did I do here? Okay, so, all right, let me back up. There is an option for people who don't want to have to mess with time that basically says you don't have to track time, you don't have to track what time you go to leads, you just play it open-ended the way you would play Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. If you ever get to a choice that says what time it is, you can basically pick what time it is, as long as going forward that day you never rewind time. So basically, I think it's easy to get rid of this for people who don't want the tension of decision making. But now let me go to the hybrid clock, because this is a key idea. So you start each day at a certain time. As you go to leads, you're tracking how much time passes. You're told at the beginning of the day, here's when the day starts, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., depending on the day, how tight the author wants to make that day. Here's when the day ends. So a typical day might start at 9 a.m., end at 5 p.m. You're tracking your time. Now, when you get to that end of day time limit, when you get to 5 p.m., something happens. Unlike Gumshoe, Queen's Park, Razorhurst, time doesn't click on into the evening and then force you to end your day. The day does not get forced ended in that same fashion. Instead, what happens is when you get to the time when the end of shift happens, you go into overtime. When you get into overtime, you stop tracking time. So essentially, there's a clock that ticks by until evening, till the end of the day, and then you enter this sort of vague, fuzzy overtime where time isn't really passing. And whether you need to go into overtime and when you have to stop your time in overtime has to do with whether you have discovered all of the requirements for that day. So I haven't explained that very well, but basically it looks like this. Here is the first day of this case, and you're told at the beginning of the day, you must encounter these markers. Think of these as sort of checkpoints or requirements in Mythos Tales. Doesn't tell you what they are, but you must encounter these 5 things during the course of the day 1. You're told the time you have. This day starts at 11 a.m., ends at 8 p.m. But you must have encountered these by the end of the day. If you do encounter these by the end of the day, then your day will end at 8 p.m. You don't continue playing. You don't have the option to continue playing. Your day ends. If you discover them early, you can keep playing till the end of the day. So as long as you find those 5 day 1 requirements, your day's going to end at 8 p.m. If you don't find them all, when you get to 8 p.m., you trigger overtime. That triggers a penalty, a score penalty called demerits, which you would mark off on the case log. You'd mark that you went into overtime for that day. You just pay the penalty when you cross the threshold into overtime. And then for the rest of your time, you're investigating in overtime. Time doesn't really pass until you find those 5 requirements, and then that clicks you into the next day. So what are the benefits of this system? First of all, the requirements are essentially the things that the author needs to have happened, needs you to have found before day 1 passes. And the best example I can give about this is, let's say the author is writing a case where the key witness is going to get killed on the second day. And 90% of players would definitely go talk to the key witness on day 1, but you don't want the game to break if they didn't. So whereas a game like Mythos Tales or Bureau of Investigation or some of these other games would have it be a catastrophe if you didn't get to this in time, High and Low is a much more curated experience in that if you're smart about your time, if you're efficient about your time, you will have done those things and get to the end of the day in time. If you're inefficient with your usage of time, you're going to get to the end of the day, you won't have found the things that you should have concentrated on, so you're going to pay a penalty, a set of some demerits. The score here in High and Low does not penalize you for how long it takes you, but it penalizes you for every day that you don't efficiently make use of your time, that you didn't go to the places that you should have prioritized. And the requirements help ensure that you have a minimal experience. The requirements don't ensure that you've seen everything. You may miss big optional pieces of the puzzle by the time you get to the end, but the author at least knows, okay, all the players are going to have seen these critical clues by the time they get to the end. So that's this idea of a soft time limit per day. Requirements that you must find each day. These are like think of these as the bare minimal critical things that the player must have done. In most of the cases, it's not, you don't want the author doesn't want a script, like here are the 5 things that every player needs to do, and that's all they're going to do. It's an open world. The players can go everywhere, and anything that could be found and survive and works if you find it on the 3rd day shouldn't be part of the day 1 requirements. These are just the minimal things that must be found on each day. And we had some very interesting discussions about, well, does it matter? Is it important that when the player sees this, that they don't know what these are? And this is one of these cases where on paper, you might think one thing. You might think, well, this is odd. You're ruining the surprise. Now they know they're going to see these 5 things. They don't know what they mean. I think in practice, from the playtesters playing the wrong book, my case that makes use of these, this has turned into a little bit of suspense and tension, like the day's ending. They found 4 of them. They're searching for the one last one. But there's been some interesting discussion about, should we tell the player these later on in the middle of the day? Should we tell them what they are? And I think a convincing case has been made that if you're going to say that an efficient player should have found these before the end of the day, then there has to be some logic to these. And I think this just points to, design-wise, the author has to make sure that these things that they require the player to find on the first day are things that the player should be expected to have followed up on the first day. There has to be a motivational reason to have found these. But now let me get into another piece of having some control, narrative control over the game and how you solve this. Now imagine you're playing Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective and you've got these and you've played and you couldn't find this one marker, and you go into overtime. Now you're searching, you can't figure it out. You can't figure out the clue. This falls into this category of having some control over difficulty level and being able to make a difficult game. So how do you solve that? How do you let the author design a very hard game that maybe novice players can play? And part of the solution to that is to have a built-in in-game hint system. So if you're playing this game on day one, you know you have to find these 5 markers by the end of the day. And by the end of the final day, you'll have a set of markers you have to find before you can get to the end of the whole case. So what happens if a player embraces this tension, tries to figure out how to get these before they get into overtime? They can't. They click into overtime. Once they click into overtime, they've paid a little penalty to their score, and now they can relax a little bit about the time, but then they search around, they can't find it. Well, they've got a couple of options. For every marker, there's a tiered ladder of hints in the game. They could go and ask their ally, hey, what's marker M? How am I going to find this? And the first clue might say something like, well, have you talked to all the witnesses? And then they're like, oh, I forgot, we should have talked to this person. They pay a little penalty for that. So while Sherlock Holmes, the scoring is based on how fast you can finish the case and how few leads you can read, in High and Low, most of the scoring is how much help you needed while playing. You could play this game and say, I'm not even going to try to figure anything out. I'm just going to treat it as a narrative experience. And as soon as I don't run into this, I'm going to go read the 3 levels of hints. And it's going to tell me at the end exactly where to go. Each hint you get that you need more help with more details, you pay a slightly higher cost. There's also a separate decision you can make to get advice about how to focus your efforts on a given day. So you could, at day 1, says this, there are specific hints for each of the day's required items. If you need guidance on where to focus your efforts on any given day, you can drop by your old police precinct. So for each of the 3 days in the sample case, if you start the day and you're like, I can't find any of these, I don't even know what we should do, you can go visit your ally. You have to pay some demerits for the advice. And he might say, well, here's where I think you might, given where your case is, where you might focus your efforts, what kinds of things you should be working on today. So that's not specific hints about where to find some of these things, but some guidance on what to do. And that's the structure of this game, that you can in-game get help where to focus, but you pay for that in your score. And that's how your score is based, on your answering questions, but on the help you needed along the way. Debbie says, not every letter is used. Most entries will not have one, but that doesn't mean they're not important. Yeah, they are sprinkled throughout. Even some of them are used for requirements, the way Mythos Tales is and the way the Baker Street Irregulars is set up to say, like, well, if you found this, then this lead can depend on that. But then some of them are dependent on these requirements, gating. Okay. The other thing that you get from this is this is where I was talking about getting the best of both worlds, because on one hand, we've got this pacing system where days can be structured as narrative acts. You know that the person is going to get kicked over to day 2 when they found these certain things. So in a certain set of conditions, as soon as they've seen enough that they need to see on day one, the game forces them into the next day. But if they haven't, then the game slows down a little and allows them to explore at their own pace, open world, and find the stuff they need to find. And when they find all those required items, the game kicks them in. It's sort of like simulating what you might use an app to do, trigger an event after they've done the things that you need them to do. Okay, greater control over the player seeing the important things. Now, it does trade some artificiality about what time of day it is, because after you get to the end of the day, time sort of freezes. But I think that addresses another problem that we've had with some of these games, which is when you have a game like Gumshoe or Queen's Park, which goes into 10 p.m., 11 p.m., one of the reasons why we have to make the clock stop in overtime is because otherwise, if we didn't, the player would be at 4 a.m., 3 a.m. into the evening in overtime and knocking on doors of the school and seeing the children play, etc. So that's the artificiality sort of imagination we're saying, that like during most of the case, it's during the day. And when you get into overtime, you're in this fuzzy sort of twilight time where time stands still. That means the leads can be still left ambiguously timeless. There is a special late night leads section in high and low that works differently. But again, the only way we can pull that off is to say that after a certain hour, we're in this fuzzy twilight, timeless overtime. It's a little bit of suspension of disbelief, but I think it works. It turns out to work, and the mechanical advantages of it are very strong. And the other thing that we can double down on is because now we are tracking actual time of day. So it's all during the main course of the day, starting at 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're actually tracking time of day. Then I think this is another one of these things that mechanically supports authors in doing things like having leads have different answers depending on where you go and when. And I think some of that can be supported by the tool that builds the stories, but I think that should be embraced by when you're authoring cases. You should reward players for making efficient decisions. Like if you wait 2 days to interview the witness, that witness should remember less well than if you interview them first, etc. Okay, so again, the idea here is to incentivize efficient use of the player's time and control of the pacing, but not break if they're inefficient about time or if they make a different decision that you didn't anticipate. So that's the solution. Don't make huge areas of the game inaccessible if the player doesn't choose to go there in a timely fashion, but make there be a cost to that, a cost narratively and a cost for score. And then I've talked about the in-game decision-making around hints. Razorhurst used that to good effect. Okay, and then there are a couple things that happen at the end of the game that address this as well, which it pays to talk about briefly because it's come up in our discussion here. So remember, I've said that when you discover all the required items for a day, it kicks you to the next day. And the end of the case is similar, but with a little twist. We don't want to force players to end the game at a certain time limit. But we want to eliminate the problem of spending 2 hours traipsing around the world just for the fear that you're going to get a question that you haven't resolved. And so we're trying to incorporate some of the house rules we play with Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective into this system. So basically what happens, if you imagine the final day works much like the other days, if you can find all the critical items, you kick into the end of case. If you can't, you pay a penalty and you go into overtime until you find them. Maybe I should say, for people who have been watching, this has been a slight mechanical change. Originally, the idea was to have an end of day briefing of narrative questions that check that you found all the critical items. Now we're using these requirements. Okay, but now, when you get past the final day, you sort of go into a conclusion, a final case conclusion that's got steps that allow you to kick back out, much like suspects. So basically, when you get past when the end of day triggers, because you've seen all the critical items, remember, there may be lots of things you haven't seen still. You've just seen the critical items. Then you have a choice. You can go back out. Now the game tells you, hey, you have seen everything critical. You could try to answer the questions now. So the player doesn't need to guess that they've seen all the critical things. The player can rest assured there's no super critical, absolutely essential clue they haven't seen by the time they get to that end stage. There's no more running around for 3 hours wondering if there's some key piece of the mystery. But there still may be optional stuff they haven't seen and lots of confirmatory evidence. So when you get to that end stage, you're allowed to go back out and search some more. If you haven't gone into overtime yet, you can do so for free now. So you've gained the benefit for being efficient. You can go back out. Or you can say, I'm going to read the final questions. So you read the final questions, and then you've got another choice you can make. You can pay some demerits and go back out. Now that you've seen the questions, maybe you see a question that you're like, I don't really know the answer to that. I didn't anticipate that question. I don't know the answer. I'm going to go back out, do some more research, and come back. But then you pay a penalty for changing your answer, much like Suspects does. So you still have the opportunity to see everything, but you're going to pay a penalty if you change your answer. So again, for the completionist, you can still see everything. You can spend as much time, but you're going to suffer in your score and maybe in your narrative explanation of how well you did if you take too much time to learn everything. And then there's addition, doubling down on this idea of in-game hints. At the end of the case, you could even say, okay, I want to pay some demerits to get some advice. And you can basically read a little dialogue where you talk through the case with someone, and they basically just run through the questions and talk a little bit more about how you might think about them. So it's basically like, give me a little more, give me a nice narrative scene if I need more help, like I'm really stuck. And some people are going to read that and be like, that's fine, I'll read that, and if I figured it out on my own, I won't penalize myself. Or some people are like, just give me the narrative, the most narrative as possible. Let me do the least work trying to figure things out. So that would be a step you could take to get some extra in-game help at a cost. Again, everything is cost to your score of getting more help. So that's yet another in-game hint. So there's basically 3 little in-game hints. You can get hints at cost about how you should think about the current day's agenda. There are hints you can get specifically on laddered hints for each of the markers, multiple hints at different levels of detail, and then an end-game sort of dialogue hint of how to think through the questions if you're stuck. Plus the ability to go back into the world and do more investigating after you see the questions at a cost. And I think that's about it here. So to summarize my pitch here about this is, reward the optimizers, the players who are playing to optimize most efficient use of their time and want to maximize their score. Their score is based on using their time efficiently without being penalized for going back out and confirming everything. You only would get penalized if you change your answers. This is like the Suspects approach of reward the people who are most efficient with their time. reward the optimizers, ensure that everyone gets good coverage of the critical clues. That lets you make the game much more difficult. You can also make the game much more difficult because people who need help can get hints at a cost to their score. So now you can make the baseline of all cases much harder, knowing that people who are not ready for a super hard case can still get the full satisfying narrative experience because they can get in-game hints. Reward the optimizers, ensure sufficient coverage so you can make difficult cases, and then accommodate the completionists. Don't penalize the people who want to go and find everything. So there you have it. I think that's the end slide. That's my pitch. Okay, let's look at the channel here. Let's catch up on chat. Rocky says, I think Rocky, who wrote one of the second test case for high and low, his own case, which you can play, which is quite fascinating, says, I think these would be better in the day's introduction, such as I need to track down a witness to the crime today. The marker system is jolting. Okay, so I have discussed a sort of hybrid approach to that. As I have it now, you're just told these are the 5 markers. It's much more mechanical. But now there is an optional lead you can go to that gives you that information. So that's the only part that I'm disagreeing with. I'm not disagreeing that it's kind of useful, that here are the things I should track down today. It's just now you have to make the choice to do that. If you want to talk to someone who's like, what should you do today? Or maybe it's, you could even just think of it as talking to yourself about what's a good agenda for today? What tasks should I have for today? That is in the case now. For each day, there's a little, very brief little summary of like, I think today I should do these things. It's just you have to choose to get that as an option. If you'd rather have a much more open-ended thing, you can go out and explore, do whatever you want, and see if you stumble on those things. Or you could do it a hybrid. You could say, I'm going to spend most of the day trying to play the case the way I think I should play it. And if I do, hopefully I'll discover all those things, requirements. But maybe as it gets to 3 p.m., you're like, I'm a little scared that we're not going to find these. So let me go get some advice about what I should be thinking about doing today. Maybe there's something I haven't thought of. And then you could choose to get that information when you want. Debbie says, Rocky, yes, we've discussed having that in addition to the markers. The point is to let players know when they can end the day, unlike Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, where it's often very unclear. Rob says, there's been a lot of discussion about how the markers should be handled, if they should be revealed at the start of the day, or if you should tell the actual goal for each marker. That's what we're talking about. Rocky says, what or how would you make something challenging in high and low? I think that might be a subject for a separate whole talk. I talked a little bit about it in some other videos I've done, but I've made my case for high and low, which is very challenging and has got a bunch of different ways that it's challenging. So people who are interested can try that. I think I will be doing a video at some point about how to make challenging puzzles in these kinds of games. But let's save that for a slightly different discussion. The main point I've been trying to make, though, here is that the author has much more freedom to make a very hard case in high and low because of the built-in game hint systems that will save someone from being stuck. Debbie says, figuring out how to solve a mystery is the challenging part, both where to go, who to talk to, and how to work out the solution from the information you find. I think if you play my case, you'll find that even if you've gone to everything and found all the critical requirements, that you'll find the final questions are still very challenging, and there are big optional pieces that you might miss if you just do the requirements. The requirements are not like complete rails. It won't make sure you've seen everything by a long shot. It just makes sure that the author has some idea of what information you have to work with when you get to the end. Making Larry says, I do think being told what the critical clues are is an issue. It makes it easier to sift the evidence you have to solve the case. I mean, yes, but this is the trade-off. If you are using an app, you could invisibly know when the player has found everything without letting them know, without leaking information about what's important. So I do think that there's a trade-off here. You are leaking information. Now you can still put some decoy requirement tags so that a person gets a tag and they think it's because they've read something important, but they haven't. But there's no getting around the fact that part of the cost to this kind of a system is that the player knows when at the end of the game, you are guaranteeing they've seen at least the minimum set of critical clues to solve the case. There's no getting around that. In Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you occasionally finish a case and you're like, you get to questions and you're like, I'm not even, the question is like, what does Mr. Phillips, how did he commit the crime, or what's his role? And you're like, we never found Mr. Phillips. Well, there you go. The case has not got you to the end, let you finish without having discovered this key piece of evidence. And that's the high risk with actual high costs. The benefit is, for the smart players, they were always walking on a tightrope without a net. They could have fallen. There was nothing to protect them from getting to the end without finding Mr. Phillips, but they did find Mr. Phillips and they felt that tangible sense of risk. And that becomes much harder to do to make a hard case like that. You can make an easy case like that, but to make a very hard case where most people might miss a critical piece of evidence, that's going to have most people having a bad experience. But so there's a trade-off. Here, the trade-off is we're not guaranteeing the player sees everything. And ideally, the minimal required critical set of clues that the game will require you see should leave you with a very, very, very hard case. Only by finding additional clues that aren't in that critical required set are you going to make the case more manageable for yourself. The author does not have to ensure an easy case, especially with all the hints. The author just has to have enough control over the ending that the players haven't missed absolutely critical parts. All right, going back with the chat, we're about ready to wrap this up here. Perry says, if you don't disclose what critical clues are, you can't bury those clues in a sea of pointless locations. It becomes frustrating, not entertaining or challenging. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective has a limited number of clues overall and limited number of locations. H&L has a vast number of locations and clue options. I guess that's true. I mean, I think in practical purposes, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective still has too many places to visit as High and Low. So it's not so much that there are too many locations in High and Low. It's just that with High and Low, the author has more freedom to make a more difficult case because there are guardrails for people who really get stuck in a way that there aren't for High and Low. And I think the other thing that makes it more interesting there is that scoring in High and Low, I think, should be a much more satisfying measure of your skill, because in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, you're incentivized to try to guess and end the case early without evidence, whereas in High and Low, your score is much more dependent on how much assistance you need. How many hints did you need? How often did you not make efficient use of your time? And then, of course, how well did you answer the questions? But I think if a player played through it and just took tons of hints, they could have an enjoyable narrative experience, but they're going to have a terrible score. Whereas someone who really takes their time and really thinks through the case and is a completionist and goes and sees everything can get a perfect score, because you're not going to get penalized for being a completionist and going everywhere. And if you didn't take any hints and took the time to solve this case yourself, you're not going to pay penalties. So that shows you sort of the ethos of the scoring system in high and low. It's not rewarding you for jumping to conclusions early, for seeing as little as possible. It's rewarding you for being comprehensive and not taking hints. If you don't mind taking hints, that's fine. You'll have a shorter experience at a cost of score. But you'll have, if at any time in high and low, you get bored and tired and you feel like you're flailing around, you're not stuck there. You can say, okay, let's go get some hints to nudge us to the next day. And then a new event happens and gets exciting again. So that's the psychology of how high and low aims to be more interesting, more excitingly paced to match the user's expectations. If you want to take your time and see everything, you can play it that way. As soon as you get bored, you can get an in-game nudge at a little bit of a cost that'll be reflected at the end of the game. Okay, so there we have it. Any other comments, thoughts, questions to talk about before we wrap this up, an hour and 20 minutes in? Everything I've been talking about the structure of the days, the requirements, the hints, is all present in my sample case that you can now play for high and low digitally. You wouldn't want to print it out. Still tweaking a little bit of the rules, but it is available. So if you're interested in playing and see how these things work in practice, you can come by the Discord. In a couple weeks, it'll be made more public. I'll post on Board Game Geek right now just through the Discord because I'm still making changes. But if you'd like to play test it, I'd love to hear a report of how well you did. You can come by the Discord channel for High and Low. There's a link on this YouTube channel if you'd like to try writing a case. I mean, there's lots of things. We're still experimenting. Some of the stuff I've talked about will probably change. But if you're interested in seeing how all of this maps from theory to a real actual case, there is a case demonstrating it. You can play it and see what you think about it. All right. Anything else? I mean, we can sit here for a bit and just chat if people have more questions. If you have more thoughts about this, if you're watching it after the fact, of course, you can comment on this video, but you could also come by the Discord where there are channels where we discuss this endlessly, so much, in fact, that people are rage quitting and getting quite angry during the discussions because we're spending too much time back and forth on it. As I've said all along, though, one of the things that I find to be true for board game design in general is that it's very hard to anticipate what ideas that sound good on paper actually work like in practice. And all of these things are like hypotheses that need to be tested. Everything I'm talking about is a hypothesis to test with high and low, and high and low is like a laboratory for testing these theories. Do the markers leak too much information? Do they suck away some of the time? Do we still capture the bulk of the time tension with this system? Do you need real high wire risk? Or can we create the illusion of it? Do the hints work? Does the scoring work? These are all things we are experimenting with. And that's what high and low is all about. A framework for doing these experiments. Different authors will try different things. You can play my case see how well some of these ideas work, which worked for you, which didn't, and we'll keep iterating on this as we explore this space. Macon says, I'm kind of convinced, I think, as long as tracking time elapsed isn't onerous. Well, that was one of the things I really needed convincing of. I was very skeptical about tracking time because I found it a little bit frustrating in games like Queen's Park and Gumshoe. But I think we've hit on a balance that feels right to me. Not just not fiddly for the player and the cost. I do think there's some cost in tracking the time, but very much also the issue of the fiddliness for an author. And part of the solution to that has been writing this tool to help make these case storybooks. And using that tool makes it a lot easier to say, okay, the default time for every lead is going to be 30 minutes, and then I can just add times on the ones that don't need exact time. Sean Higgins says, I like the philosophy, will be fun to see it in action. Something that could be helpful will be playing through a draft case once as a playtest, and then again with the author providing commentary. Well, this is a very interesting point. So let's talk about that for a second. I've been thinking about playing through my case on the channel. I obviously can't play it. And with the time delays on YouTube, it's a little tricky to just be the moderator while people make decisions. But I am very much, Sean is proposing a slightly different thing, whereas like a director commentary on the case. So I would be open to playing through my demo case in some fashion on the channel. Either maybe with one person in the channel making decisions, or maybe with a Zoom conversation. Maybe we pick 3 people who can play it live with me, and I'll just run through it and talk about it as we play. Or I could just walk through the solution to the case and explain it. So it is a really interesting idea. I'm completely open to the idea of sort of walking through the case and talking about it. There is a channel on the Discord for people who have finished the case to talk about it. There's been some disagreement about whether there's enough evidence for certain questions, and I've been tweaking it a little bit, but that's a very interesting idea. Debbie Levy says, I do like many things, the markers in the hint system. Regarding scoring, I'm just disappointed that we spent months discussing alternatives, only to end up with Queen's Park with extra complications. Well, Debbie has been one of the advocates for not wanting this extra tension of time. And I really think, I mean, look, there is a phenomena with board games where what's the right term for it? Have you ever played board games where the game says, here's normal difficulty, hard difficulty, and easy difficulty, and you just cannot get yourself to play on easy difficulty? I mean, normally it's a bad idea, but it's kind of arbitrary, right? And there are a couple games where it feels like the normal hard level of difficulty could very well be much less fun. The game that comes to mind is Arkham LCG. That's probably one of those games that has a very oppressive feel, and I think might be more enjoyable played on an easier difficulty. This is all my way of saying, look, there is an explicit mode here called flex time for people who don't want to micromanage their time. And here's what it says. It says, look, if you dislike micromanaging your time, here are the new rules. Ignore all time tracking instructions. Don't worry about recording what time you go to every lead. Don't worry about recording how long a lead takes. Don't worry about overtime. Just go to leads as you want them. If you ever encounter a lead that says, if you come here during the day, then go here. If you come here during the night, go here. Pick a time. Say, okay, I'm thinking that it's 6 p.m. when we get there. Then go to that branch. And then for the rest of the day, it's 6 p.m. or later. That's the only thing you do. And I made a little comment here to convince people, calm down. You're not getting a lesser experience. Don't think that you're playing on kiddie mode. I do think it's going to reduce some of the tension in decision making. If you don't want that, this is a completely reasonable way to play. And I'm committed to making this a full experience of a case. So I think don't feel like I'm getting the baby rules and I'm missing out on high and low. I'm missing out on the real experience if I play without in that time mode. That's not the case. You're getting the full narrative experience. Maybe you're even getting a richer narrative experience because you're never going to get locked out of things because of the time. And there's a little bit of an element with high and low where if you go into overtime, maybe when you get into the late night leads, you might not have enough flexibility to do all the things you want to do. But if you don't play with overtime, you're not locked into that. So I think really that should be sufficient for people who don't want that tension of time. Rocky says, I got all the markers but couldn't solve it, but I know you've done a lot of changes since then. It'd be interesting to do it. Perhaps Greg can play it with the channel and Jesse as commentator afterwards. It's a long case. I think we're talking about a 4-hour or more case, my case, maybe best split over multiple days. The rules now tell you as you play, between days, this would be a good time to take a break if you've been playing for a couple hours. I think that's another advantage of breaking these things into multiple acts and having some control over when the player transitions between acts is the author can make a sort of balanced case where the days are about the same length of real world playtime and good points to take breaks. This Pamonite says, for the time issue, you could have someone pre-play it and just follow their leads and then include notes on why they made the decisions. Well, I have gotten some good feedback from Nicola, from some play testers, so I can see exactly where they... One of the disadvantages of making a case is that sometimes it's very hard to get a feel for how players experience the game. And so it's really nice if a playtester, I guess what I'm saying is I'd love to have playtesters who can record the experience in some fashion. It doesn't have to be video or audio. It could just be a diary of summarizing the experience as they played it. Nicola played through it with someone and they kept track of their thinking along and what decisions they made along the way. It was very helpful to see when they were thinking certain things and other things. And Tina says, do you think you have the final form of the case or are there future changes? My case is pretty much locked down now. I think it's pretty finished. The only thing I'm tweaking now is the wording of the rules about how the time works on the final day. We've discussed the idea, little tweaks to incentive systems. That's at one point it was you get penalized for every turn in overtime you are, and I think we've simplified that a lot. I like the idea now it's a threshold. Once you kick into overtime for a day, you get a slight penalty, and then that's it. You can spend as much time. And we're tweaking the little bits of rules. The only thing that's tweaking now is little bits of rules about the final questions, about being when you're able to go back out and change your answers and the wording of that rule. And I think I'm just trying to capture the basic suspects idea that you can go back out after you answer the questions. So you can read the questions and go back out, and then you can answer the questions and go back out. And if you answer the questions and go back out and change any answers, then you pay a demerit. So it's a little bit the idea of trying to, for people who like optimizing their score and trying to do as well as they can, it's trying to reward them for being able to answer those questions earlier rather than going back out and taking their time and then changing their answers. They should be able to do that just at a slight score penalty, but basically the case is finished. Sean Higgins says, looking forward to this tool you've discussed. I think visualizing the case logic will be helpful for writers and for demonstrating the value. Okay, well, I have shown some of the plot maps that get generated by this tool. This tool is turned out to be extremely useful in handling all kinds of things, including making sure there are no missing problems with the case, but also helping you write the case, helping you avoid redundant writing text over and over again, making a PDF with clickable links. If you play my case, you'll see all the links are clickable. It's got a table of contents and everything. And all the rules are just stuck in, so you don't have to write the rules. And it generates these plot maps. Right now, the tool is written in Python, requires Python with a bunch of modules and a LaTeX install to generate the PDFs. So the big part of the coding project that I'm going to work on next is an online version of this tool so that any author can use this tool to make their PDFs without having to install any software. But also with that will be the ability for people to play cases online without having to download the PDFs and play cases in a way that the author can basically see a playthrough. So the author of the case will be able to see where people got stuck, what leads people tried to go to that didn't exist. Then they might realize, oh, I got to add an entry for this cafe that everyone thinks is related to the case. The Spamonite says the table of contents is a godsend. It absolutely is. Water, who wrote the very first case for high and low, is the person who showed us how valuable a table of contents can be in terms of looking up leads. It takes much of the pain away from looking up leads that aren't in the book. Okay. Well, why don't we end this video here? Next design diary will be in a month or so. I'll see some of you on Discord. If you're a programmer and you're interested in joining this project, I'd love to talk to you on Discord. If you're interested in writing a case for high and low, and there's still a little dust to settle, but come by the Discord and talk to me about it. There are a couple of us still working on cases and lots of new ideas. And Tina wants to play Funny Pages or Black Stories, but after 5.5 hours last night and a couple hours today, I need a little break, but it's possible we could play something tonight or tomorrow. Better to break these things up, though. Okay, so thanks. Sorry, no more games today's session, but we'll be playing more next week. I've got a couple of small games I want to get played in the coming week. I want to play the Mortem Medieval Detective expansion. I want to play the 7C puzzle game by the makers of Escape Tales. Funny Pages, I'm not 100% sure about. And we've got a new Dear Holmes case coming next week at 3 p.m. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.